I joined a monastery in Nigeria. So let's put that in. Let's put that within context. Yes. Yeah, I wasn't eating bread and egg for breakfast and bacon, right? This is in Nigeria. That's where I joined the monastery. So I learned to cut grass with a cutlass. Yeah, we were assigned a portion of bush that we had to cut. In the fires of pain and suffering, in mindfulness, in Buddhist psychology, we call it suffering. Suffering is the fact of living. And so what we were taught in a monastery is that willfully dropping into suffering, willfully dropping into pain, there's something transformative or transforming about that. Leadership is really all about recognizing that something is not right with me, not with others, with me. What am I going to do about that? For anyone who is going through any kind of pain, any kind of personal challenge, any kind of suffering, something that they're dealing with at the moment that is just causing so much agony. And as counter as this may sound, I want them to know that it's okay.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be a monk, to dedicate your life to meditation, every single day waking up and going at it again and again and again? Well, Jude-Martin Etuka did that for 7 years. When he was 18, when all the rest of us were out partying, drinking, he was sitting on the mat in silence as a monk. And what he learned and who he became is incredible. And why I love this man is because of his energy. He is one of the kindest, most grounded, most balanced people that I have met. And you can feel from him a love for life and a comfort in being in the world. And you'll hear about his perspectives on what it means to be emotionally intelligent, to lead yourself, whether that's in a corporate environment or just anywhere in your life. You'll walk away with a much greater appreciation of what it means to take your meditation practice and get it up off the mat and out into the world. And if you've never meditated before, you'll see what it can do to a person and the difference it can make in a life. Jude shares some hilarious stories about his life in the monastery, as well as some really human and touching advice about how to show up in the world, no matter what the cards are that life has dealt you. Let's do it. One quote that I really liked when on some of the blogs that I read from you was your focus on self-awareness, self-discovery, deep mindfulness, deep self-awareness. You said things like, building greater self-awareness is not just about you, it's fundamentally about the other. Journeying through the process of self-discovery, it will result in a change in perception of ourselves and others. And I'd love to hear about what are some of those changes in perception that you've experienced.
Yeah, I recognize that. There's a philosopher, you probably know him, Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre is an existentialist French philosopher. And I'm into existentialist philosophy. I love existential philosophy.
Could you define existential philosophy?
Yes. So back in the day when I was studying philosophy, there's some philosophers that I just did not understand. Couldn't understand them. They speak a different language. And then I stumbled into, as part of the curriculum, we did what was called existentialist philosophy. And existentialist philosophy is basically the philosophy of reality as it is. This is life. This is life. This is who we are. This is what it means to be a human being within a realm of existence. That's existential philosophy, pretty much. This is what it means to be a living human being in the realm of existence. And so there are philosophers like Heidegger, who you may have heard about. And Heidegger had what he called the philosophy of being. He talked about Dasein, D-A-S-E-I-N-G, it's a German word. And Dasein from memory means being as. That's what it means. Being as. Just being as, being who you are as you are. You can't be anything else. And Jean-Paul Sartre, who I believe lived after, he came after Heidegger. Heidegger was one of the key proponents of this philosophy, returning to what it means to be a human being. And of course, you know, when you sort of trace in the history of existentialist philosophy, before that was Plato, you know, Platonic philosophy, which really, you know, Plato's philosophy was influenced by Aristotle and all that kind of stuff, you know, really interesting philosophy. But sometimes Platonic philosophy or Socratic philosophy could be somewhat quite difficult to understand. And so almost like Heidegger's philosophy, existentialist philosophy, was returning to what it meant to be a human being. Let's philosophize from here. And so Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a existentialist philosopher, I loved his philosophy. And actually, when I think back to Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy, it really influenced influenced me tremendously in terms of, you know, we talk about mindfulness, what it means to be mindful. I'm not quite sure Jean-Paul Sartre himself was a mindful, really embraced what today we call mindfulness, but certainly in his philosophy of life, towards life, he certainly was a very mindful philosopher. And he talks about otherness. This is where your quote comes from. Otherness. And the perception around what it means to what the other person is. And Heidegger set the tone for that, because Heidegger says you are always a human being in relation to. We're always, whatever it is we're doing, we're always doing it in relation to. You and I are having this conversation. But we are having this conversation in relation to whoever it is that is going to be listening to this. After we've had this conversation, you will probably listen to it back, as will I. Well, we having this conversation in relation to ourselves too, which is quite interesting. And Jean-Paul Sartre picked up that thought, and he talks about, and this is what really got me about Jean-Paul. I love Jean-Paul Sartre. He gave this analogy. He talks about otherness, and he gives this analogy. He says, "Go to the beach." He says, you used to live in Bondi, so you'll get this. He says, "Go to the beach," and this analogy is, he was talking about this analogy in terms of trying to understand who you are as a human being. So, who is Jude as a human being? Who is Kian as a human being? Who am I? And he says, if you really want to understand who you are, you can really understand who you are in relation to the other person. And he says, go to the beach and see if you can pick up 1 grain of sand, not 2. With your fingers, try and pick up 1 grain of sand. What happens?
You're going to pick up every little bit's going to stick to your finger. You're going to be covered in sand.
Exactly. You can't. And it's an interesting analogy because what he was saying there is actually when you're trying to discover who you are, inevitably in doing so, you find out that actually you are intricately connected with the other person. You know, and even the monks who went and lived in solitude, yes, who took themselves away from the world to go and live outside the world, the initial struggle was actually the removing themselves away from, taking themselves away from that which they are constantly in relation to. And so in terms of perception, what I realized very quickly, certainly during my days of solitude, spending time in silence, was that you're doing that. You're always doing that in relation to. There's a benefit. It's not all about yourself. It's about what that gives you, so that you can give to the other person. Jean-Paul Sartre, yeah. What a good place to start this conversation, I think. The philosophy of otherness. And what's also interesting, so this is kind of coming to mind now as I'm speaking about Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy about you discover yourself in others, because other people are always a reflection of yourself. Really, and there's a Nigerian proverb. Can I say this? I don't know if I've said this to you before. There's a Nigerian proverb which really helps to explicate Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy and even Heidegger. And in this Nigerian proverb, it goes, when you point a finger accusing someone of doing something, how many are pointing back at yourself? Even though it's 3 pointing back at yourself, actually, even the thumb, which is pointing that way, the Nigerian proverb actually is pointing back at you too. So you got 4 fingers pointing back at yourself. When you're pointing to the other person, actually, there are 4 fingers pointing back to yourself. And that is a really interesting proverb because it talks about we as human beings, that in trying to discover who I am, the other person is always a mirror that I can look at to go, how am I actually going? You know, how am I actually going? The final thing I'll say about, you've really dropped, I think you started at the perfect place. Because even Daniel Goleman, who, as you know, is the father of emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman defines emotional intelligence as, he says, you cannot lead yourself. Sorry, you cannot lead others unless you first of all learn to lead yourself. The heart of emotional intelligence. It's not about leadership. It's not about leading the other person, really. It's about the more you can lead yourself, the more you're able to lead others.
Beautifully put. So the recognition of who we are depends on the mirror of the other person. You're pointing to the interrelationality of all things, actually, human beings, but also our interconnectedness to everything. In Buddhism, it's the interdependent co-arising of phenomena, how every single thing is connected and interrelated. And the recognition of that complex web of systems at all times, as opposed to this individualistic perspective of, I am an island in the world and so is everyone else. I'm looking out behind these eyes out to the world and we've got all these different individuals moving.
Yeah.
The question of who am I came up there, and it's a central question in this human experience. And I know from your background, you spent 7 years in a monastery from the age of 18. And I would be interested to hear about what life was like there and how has your exploration into that question of who am I, what fruit has born from it.
Yeah. Yeah, who am I is the eternal question. It's a perennial question that every human being is actually asking themselves. Sometimes they don't realize that they're asking themselves. Those internal struggles, those moments when we sit back and we're sort of scratching our heads, the fluttering of the heart, the knots in the stomach, what's happening here? What is all this about? It's the who am I question that everyone is responding to. My connection with that question, as you rightly pointed out, started. I was going to say it started at the age of 18, but actually it started way before that. Yeah, it started, and you and I have spoken about this before. It started for me when I was pretty much plucked out of what was Chelsea back in the 1970, I don't know, 1978 or whatever it was, when I was 8 years old, 79, when my father, who is an amazing man, a Nigerian, traditional Nigerian man through and through, traditional Nigerian man. He's 89 now, turning 90 this year. He had gone to the UK in the late 50s, studied, became a barrister, practiced, but always was always going to go back to Nigeria and practice as a barrister in Nigeria. He was a traditional, proud Nigerian man. And I come from a family of 4 boys. And I remember him and my mum said, "Oh, listen, you're going to come to Lagos on holiday." And we were so excited. Going to go to Lagos on holiday. And cut the long story short, we ended up going to Lagos. We were so excited. We got to Lagos. And then when we arrived, my father said, "Hey, guess what? You're not going back. You're here to stay. You're here to stay. You're not going back." This was my own story, At the time, I didn't know what that was, and I couldn't really articulate how that felt. But I remember that what I do remember was all of us bursting into tears, like it was, you couldn't really fathom it. I ended up going to boarding school in Nigeria at the age of 8, plucked out of Western society with a Cockney accent, cutting my teeth, and I went to a boarding school which was about 2.5 hours from Lagos, which is pretty much which was at the time civilization in Nigeria, to a boarding school 2.5 hours away in a place called Ibadan. And I think I told you the story of my father drove me to boarding school in his green Lancer. I remember that. I still remember it quite well. He bought me some provisions. We drove up this hill to the boarding school, took me into the dormitory, and then dropped me off there. Gave me a hug. Looked at me, gave me a hug. Got into his green Lancer, and I stood there watching him as he drove down, as the green Lancer drove down the hill and out of sight. And there was I, and I stood there, and I stood there, and I was looking. I was like, what do I do now? 8 years old. So that for me was when my journey of who am I really started, and from that age all the way through to the age of 18, when I then decided, there's a lot of story to tell in between that, but that could be for another time. But for me, that was when when I put my reflective lens on, that's when the journey of who am I started. And cut long story short, I've always been a bit of a philosopher, asking myself this question: what's going on in here? What's all this stuff? Questions, all these things going on in my mind. I couldn't switch off. I couldn't switch off the constancy of this stuff going on. Cognition. I call it cognition. There's a researcher called, I think it's Worthington, in 2010, talked about the wandering mind and the voice in the head, the uncontrollable voices that we hear. And we all hear it. We normalize it. We all hear it. But Worthington talks about the uncontrolled wandering mind is problematic when you just leave your mind to wander. And we do that all the time in present day society, and we've normalized it, but it's not normal to leave your mind just to wander off doing its thing. Because what the mind does is that I describe the mind when it does that like a hoover. You know when you're hoovering the carpet, right? It hoovers up all sorts of stuff. And you don't know that it's hoovered up all sorts of stuff until you're sat down and you just notice that you're in a mood. And you don't know why you're in a mood. It's because it's your mind is at play. It's hoovered up all sorts of stuff which is at playing in the background. That was me when I was 18, and I was questioning that. Who am I? And that's what drove me into making a decision to go, look, I'm going to go into the monastery. As it happens, my family were close to some monks. And I used to go talk to the monks. My parents knew I had this thing going on, this question, and I was introduced to one of the monks, and that was it. That was it. All my mates were going to university, and I decided to go into the monastery to answer that question. So that's how I went into the monastery, immediately I got into the monastery, I realized that the way to answer that question was not to attempt a cognitive answer. I learnt to sit with the ruminations, to sit with the wandering mind. The difference being this time, and you understand this, kid, sitting intentionally with the ruminations. All of a sudden, you've brought in awareness. Awareness now becomes a filter through which you now watch the wandering mind. And all of a sudden, your mind is no more wandering because awareness is there behind the scenes and you're watching it. And all of a sudden, there's now, in the midst of the wandering, there's a peace, there's a space that has been created. Awareness arises, and all of a sudden, there's a subtle but very powerful distinction between the mind left wandering by itself and you as a person allowing your awareness, which has been parked in a car park for so long, you've now intentionally brought that into this space, and there's some difference.
How would you articulate the significance of that difference? What does that ability to hold this wandering mind in awareness, what are the implications of that?
Well, so John Kabat-Zinn, who you know, John Kabat-Zinn is supposedly the father of modern day mindfulness. He talks about when he attempts a definition of what it means to be mindful, he describes it as paying attention to awareness that arises in the moment, non-judgmentally. So awareness that arises in the moment, paying attention to that without any judgment. So the significance of, and what that means is there's an intention, there's an intentionality that you and I as human beings, or anyone who is listening to this, anybody who actually suffers what we all suffer, the wandering mind, and the implications of when that mind wanders unhindered. And the implications can be quite catastrophic if it's not quote unquote controlled. If you leave your mind to wander, that can lead to catastrophizing, negativity, self-doubt, questioning yourself and who you are and why you are. It can lead to tremendous negativity. When we are able to connect with awareness, there's a space, there's a spaciousness, a peacefulness that arises. And Kabat-Zinn, when he says paying attention, I often ask the question, paying attention to what? What are you paying attention to that enables awareness to arise? Well, you're paying attention to, for example, we started this conversation, if you remember, by paying attention to the feeling of our big toe and small toe on the floor, the body. How often do we pay attention to the body? How often?
Rarely.
Rarely. Because it's not important. But the body has taken you and I everywhere we've ever been. The body has. The body knows more than the mind does. The mind forgets stuff, right? Like, I can guarantee you, my mind is, I got a terrible mind. You know, you're going to say to me, Jude, in 10 years time, you say, Jude, do you remember coming to have a chat with me at my place, having this podcast? And I'm going, well, can you remind me? Okay. The mind will forget, but the body will remember. The body always remembers. And so when Kabat-Zinn says paying attention to the body, what he's talking about is actually giving your body some credit. Focusing on the soles of your feet, noticing the sensations of your toe touching the floor. Not because it's going to give you anything, but because in the moment, that's all that matters. And what arises out of that is a sense of awareness that actually curtails the wandering mind, gives you a sense of calmness and peace. All of the internal knots in the stomach, the struggles, all of a sudden it's put within perspective, and you find yourself actually functioning at your fullest capacity as a human being in this moment, which is all we have, really. We don't have another moment. You and I are sharing this space now, this moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Because what it describes is, what does it actually mean? What does it actually mean to be a human? Like, who am I? Because when you start to go, well, initially I'm identified as my thoughts, because that wandering mind is got a direct feed. It's like it's hooked so close to me. It keeps feeding me bits I've picked up from my parents, from my ancestors that I saw on TV. It keeps feeding me this continuous narrative, and I'm just gulping it down. I'm just gulping it down, and I'm not questioning it. And I'm saying, well, that's true. What that person said that thing about me, and maybe what if they hate me now? And it's like, it just gives you this direct line, and that mind is being fueled by a nervous system which has been taught to be afraid, and emotions which are running rampant, coming off old memories in that nervous system, and this whole entire complex system inside us. At the top of it is this mind that's narrating the world around us. And because we've been conditioned for survival and to look out for threats, it's constantly giving us the bad news, the potential bad news. And it's a very limited snapshot of reality. And I think the recognition that there's this space that can be the witness of all of that, and that to go take that even a step further, to expand your sense of identification beyond just feelings, emotions, thoughts, into actually saying, wow, well, if the awareness is continuous, and this awareness, this witness has always been there, but the thoughts, emotions are continuously changing, then what's more real? What's more stable? Who am I more so? And there's something there about broadening your identification to say, yes, wow, I'm the body, I'm the mind, but I'm also this awareness in which that is happening. And the nature of that awareness, as you described, is inherently peaceful and present. And so for me, it gives you a place to stand, to be, that is not just constantly being pulled by all of those ups and those downs. And for me, that's what the practice is about. The practice is about being able to develop the ability to step back.
Yeah.
Just constantly step back.
Yeah.
And allow. Step back and allow.
Yeah.
And so you're 18 now. You're a freshly minted monk.
Minted monk. I like that.
What was that like? What was your days like? Yeah, I'd love to hear about some of the things that, what were you hit with straight away? Just talk to me about your experience there.
So I think just before I get there, there was something that you said that which I thought is really important, because you talked about the awareness behind the mind such that we don't identify with it. And I wonder, for those that are listening, and for those for whom this is not something of interest, why is this of interest to you and I? And why could this be of interest to them? And is this different? Is this difference between being and doing? Us as a human being, or us as a human doing? Noting that you can't do anything unless you first of all be, right? That's what it means to be a human being. A human being is to actually be. You got to be first before you do stuff. You got to stop first before you start stuff. And if you're constantly doing stuff like the proverbial mouse on the wheel, yes, and the mouse on the wheel thinks, do you know what? If I can run just that bit faster, I just might catch my tail. And the mouse, increases the pace, and just as they do catch the tail, they collapse, they burn out, bang, they're gone. They're dead now because they're out of breath. There's something about stepping back into what it means to be, which is not doing, whereby the human being is able to really, what's the word? They're able to really find the energy, able to find that which is identification beyond the I, beyond the me. I'm coming to answer the question around the monastery, but I felt I needed to speak about this because René Descartes, who is a 17th century philosopher, you probably heard about him. He came out with this famous dictum, questioning. There was this question: who am I? Descartes was trying to answer the question, who am I? And Descartes, 17th century philosopher of the Enlightenment period, was regarded as a god of thinking. If anyone can answer this question, Descartes can answer the question. And so Descartes came up with this famous saying, which I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum in Latin, right? I think, therefore I am. In other words, what am I? I am a thinker. That's who I am. And the whole of our philosophy and politics in the world was embedded and created from this thinking. The whole of our workplaces, the corporate workplaces, everything is based on, you are a thinker. That's who you are. But we now know that actually, that's not who I am. The person that I am, or who I am, is he who has the capacity not to think. He or she who can decide, right now, I'm going to stop thinking for a period of time because I choose not to think. That's what I learned in the monastery. I learned that there was a Jude, there was a Jude-ness of Jude. That was not Jude the name. That wasn't Jude the thinker. But there was something behind the Jude that is intensely who I am. Intensely who I am. But intensely, subtly, quietly there. That's what I discovered in the monastery. That there is something beyond cognition, beyond the thinking, the proverbial mouse going round and round and round. There's something beyond that which we miss, which we don't pay attention to. We don't pay attention to it. And so in the monastery, I found ways, I learnt ways, I was taught ways of learning to pay attention. Let me give you tell you a story that happened in the monastery. I used to, let's call him Graham. Have I told you a story before? Graham. Let's call him Graham. And when I was in the monastery, we would have, each person will be assigned what we will call a spiritual director. Someone that you go to, and they are the person that sort of guides you.
A great job.
A great job. Hang on. Did you say that they did a great job?
Oh, what a great job.
What a great job. What a lovely job to do.
You want to be when you grow up?
Yes.
I want to be a spiritual director.
Oh, I know. Nice, huh? Graham was my spiritual director. And I remember walking into Graham's room on the first day, and just like, walking into the room, and he was sat like he was sat. And Graham was one of these guys, a bit like you, had this resting smile on his face. Yeah. And I walked in. Said, hello, Graham. He looked at me. He didn't say anything, smile on his face. Just a nod. And then I sat down opposite him. That was the way. So he was sat there, and I was sat here, and I was sat down. And I went into that room thinking, we're going to have a conversation. He's going to tell me what to do, And there Graham sat down there, smile on his face, sitting somewhat erect but comfortable. And Graham said absolutely nothing. Nothing. You know how uncomfortable that was, just sitting down there for 30 to 45 minutes? And I'm there waiting for something to be said. And he's just sat there looking at me, not staring at me, but looking at me occasionally with a smile on his face, then look away and look back. 30 to 45 minutes of nothing. That was my first session with Graham. Nothing. Oh. And then so that was something that we did on a weekly basis. So I think it was maybe around week number 4 or 5. So here I'm now getting used to walking into the room and just knowing that Graham is not going to be saying much at all. And I think it was maybe my 5th or 6th session I walk in, and I then ask Graham the question that I've asked him the 3rd or 4th time, and he's not said anything. And this time there was a certain intention about the question. I say, Graham, when you sit there without saying anything, what are you doing? And on this occasion, he responded. And he said, Jude, when I sit here looking at you, being here, he says, I'm paying attention to the soles of my feet on the floor. And I said, what does that do, Graham? And he said, it enables me to pay attention to you. And I never, ever forget that lesson. Because what that taught me was, first of all, paying attention to any part of your body, feet on the floor, feeling your hands as they are. And in this case, our hands, my hands are currently sat on the arm of the chair. The wrist is a bit sort of limp. But just paying attention to that. Just for a second. Intentionally bringing my awareness and noticing that. What you begin to notice is that behind that action, there's a gradual dropping into the moment that you begin to notice. Awareness is arising. There's a calmness. And if you pay attention even just ever so gently, you begin to notice some sensations happening around your legs, as it is happening right now, around my legs, my calves, You're dropping into this moment like you can't do cognitively. You can't do it with thinking. There's no thinking here. All there is awareness. And the space of awareness is immense. It's immense. And we've only just scratched the surface of what that space of awareness is. In that awareness, that open door of awareness, there is so much to learn. There's so much teaching to learn. That cognizing, that Descartes' thinking thing cannot even begin to grasp. That was my first lesson, Kian, in the monastery. And actually, that lesson is an eternal lesson. It's still going on. Now, other things that I did to drop into awareness were things like to help me to get in touch. Was to get in touch with suffering. So one of the things I did in the monastery was a lot of manual labor. Now, don't forget, I didn't join the monastery in Oxford or in London. I went to Nigeria. I think I mentioned it. I joined a monastery in Nigeria. So let's put that in. Let's put that within context. Yes. Yeah, I wasn't eating bread and egg for breakfast and bacon, right? This is in Nigeria. That's where I joined the monastery. So I learned to cut grass with a cutlass. Yeah, we were assigned a portion of bush that we had to cut, and I was given a cutlass. And how you use you know what a cutlass is? Yes,
like a small little knife.
Yeah, it's like a small little knife, but it's slightly elongated with a hook at the end, and you sharpen it. You file it sharp, yeah, and then you literally, with every swing of the hand, you're cutting the grass. Now, after you've done that for about 10 minutes, you just look at your hands, blisters. That was the intensity. That's what I learned. And obviously, through the cutting of the grass, through the pain of cutting the grass, there was something that was being taught here. That in the fires of pain and suffering, now, we call it pain. In mindfulness, we call it, in Buddhist psychology, we call it suffering. Suffering is it's a fact of living to suffer. And so what we were taught in a monastery is that willfully dropping into suffering, willfully dropping into pain, there's something transformative or transforming. So present continuous tense, something transforming about that, about cutting grass for an hour. You could have used a machine if you wanted, but no. But yeah, I must say, in Nigeria in those days, they probably didn't even have machines. You know, it was manual labor, and we had manual labor every day. There was a time for manual labor. There was a time for sitting in silence for hours. There was a time for denial, self-denial, fasting. So sometimes we'll fast from morning through to 6 o'clock in the evening before we eat. There was a time for no conversation. You walk past a fellow friar, and you just tip your head and say, you don't say hello, you tip your head, and you walk past. That was it. And so in the fires of silence, in the fires of manual labor, in the fires of fasting, I learnt about how to manage the wandering mind. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, what I'm hearing is, first of all, the recognition that awareness is here now, always, continuous. And when you turn your attention there, there's a spaciousness, the vast spaciousness. And then in that vast spaciousness, so much is arising, whether it's the soles of feet on the floor or pain, suffering in the hand, you're cutting grass, emotional pain. And what I hear you being taught is that the awareness holds all, doesn't turn from anything, doesn't turn from the pain, doesn't turn from the fasting. It holds it all without discrimination in a way that to me is true freedom, actually, is what it gives you, is recognizing your true nature as the awareness in which Jude is, the Judeness in which Jude is happening.
Yeah.
And its capacity to hold all of these things that the mind wants to bat away or go towards.
Mm.
So there's something hugely transformative about that.
Absolutely.
What else did they show you in this big space of awareness?
There was something we call sitting, sitting. As you describe it so well, how pain and suffering, how awareness has its capacity. Your awareness, my awareness, anyone's awareness has a capacity to be able to hold all of this, allowing it to be, allowing it to happen. But learning to sit with that, sitting, literally, we're sitting on the chair, learning to be okay with that happening, not trying to control it, just being with it. Almost like Heidegger's being with, just being with that, not trying to run away from it. So in society today, we tend to run away from pain. We pain avoidance. Actually, it's interesting because pain avoidance creates more pain. The more we try and avoid pain, actually then what you discover that you're not avoiding the pain. What you're avoiding is what the mind conceives to be painful. So you're avoiding your mind's interpretation of what pain is, which is why sometimes when you drop into pain, or when you say, okay, do you know what, you run away from pain so often that now you eventually go, do you know what, I can't run away from it. I'm just going to have to deal with it. And then you turn around, you deal with it. And what happens? You actually discover it's not as painful as you thought it was. Like a cold shower. The idea of having a cold shower or taking a jump into a cold lake is scary as hell. You don't want to do it. Your body's saying to you, don't go there. Stay away from it. But then when you do it, when you go, okay, I'm going into the cold shower now, I'm going into the water now, it's the most exhilarating experience. You say to yourself, it's amazing. Why haven't I been doing this? So learning to sit with things that we prefer not to is actually liberating. It's transformative. It's transforming. And for me, this is a continuous journey. My the research I'm doing at the moment is all about that, about paying attention, intentionally paying attention to pain, intentionally paying attention to managing my emotions and how I'm feeling, intentionally paying attention to pausing, learning to pause and to stop for a second. Intermittently during my day, just learning to stop for a second, taking a breath, and then continuing. These things, so paying attention to pain, paying attention to pause, paying attention to my emotions, doing these things intermittently during the day actually is transformative. Actually transforms me as a human being, makes me a better human being. Is what in the monastery they call sitting, sitting. So in the monastery, I learned to not avoid pain, not to become pain avoidant, but actually to go towards it. And actually going towards it was more liberating than taking a step back from it. In organizations that we work in today, in societies that we work in today, we do all we can to avoid pain, to avoid any kind of suffering. And that actually has become the cause of so much suffering. And you and I see it, you and I can understand it. People who have developed awareness, who are developing their awareness, it's a constantly, there's no one that I will say has become an expert in becoming aware. it's a continuous journey. But when we decide to drop into that space and to in mindfulness, we talk about practice, the practice of doing this. When we willfully decide to practice this, we don't have to become a meditator. You don't necessarily have to be, it doesn't have to be labeled mindfulness. It's just being a human being. Having the appreciation of awareness, having the appreciation of, I actually don't feel like doing this, but I'm going to do it. Deciding to do that and deciding to allowing yourself to do that, you begin to notice that actually there is growth happening here behind the scenes. I feel myself as a human being. There's an evolving happening. There's a growing happening. Life actually is playful despite the pain. There's a joy. Actually, I'm enjoying life. Is there pain? Yes, there is. But you know what? It's liberating. I'm enjoying I'm becoming playful with the curiosity involved in this. And it's okay, Jude. It's okay to do that. Not satisfying every single pleasure that I have because I'm trying to avoid pain. And willfully doing that is actually it's good for me. It's good for my growth. That's what I've learned. That's what I learned in the monastery. Sitting with, it just takes me back to how we started this conversation with Jean-Paul Sartre and otherness. And it comes and actually my awareness growing through willfully dropping into those spaces that I prefer not to drop into.
Yeah. Speaking of those spaces that we prefer not to drop into, I will buy the distance from thoughts. I will buy not listening to thoughts. No problem. I can see how the negative mind, the wandering mind. What about these emotions that we have in there? Because I can see how the thoughts can be illusionary and they can be influenced. I watch a movie and then suddenly I'm having all these thoughts about the movie. But these emotions seem to me closer to the bone. Like, that person really did wrong me. Like, I really am angry. I'm right to be angry. And I'd love to hear your reflections on emotional intelligence. Like, what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent when you take this light of awareness and turn it inwards to the landscape of the invisible inside? Emotions are a huge player in there. What have you learned about that?
Emotions are good things. Anger is good. There's nothing wrong with anger. It's our understanding of anger, how we interpret and deal with anger that can become problematic. Emotions are beautiful. I have a daughter, Rafaela, and she's doing very well in school at the moment. She's in year 7. She's going to year 7. She's finishing year 6. And this term, she came back from school, and her report is has just been the best that it's ever been. So she's doing really well, and that gives me so much joy, emotional joy, as any father would have. That's an emotion, and it's a great thing. At the same time, anyone who's got a partner, you have arguments, you have quarrels with your partner. Is there anything wrong with that? No. It's an emotion. You feel the emotion involved in it. We are emotional beings. And so, Goleman really tries to make emotional intelligence real when he talks about emotional intelligence as how I, as a human being, lead my own emotions. How do I lead how I show up? How do I do that? And so emotional intelligence is really all about, I like the word E. So the E in emotion, E-motion, energy in motion. You can feel your emotions. It's not a theory, right? You can feel your emotions, the energy moving all around your body. You can feel the emotions in your feet. When you say something that maybe is giving you joy, actually, if you actually take a step back and pay attention, using that word by John Kabat-Zinn as part of his definition of what it means to be mindful, paying attention. If you pay attention to when you are feeling happiness, for example, you might feel the happiness around here, but if you pay attention to it, you will notice that actually it's not just in your chest. It's moving around your body. You can feel the happiness in your toe if you want to. At the same time, if you feel angry, you can feel anger. Anger, you can feel it. Maybe some people's brain begins to pulsate. They begin to sweat, sweaty palms. So emotions are naturally tied to every single part of your body. So the intelligence involved in that is awareness, being aware of what's happening to you as it's happening. Intelligence. Emotions have intelligence if we listen to them. More often than not, we don't. More often than not, we allow our emotions to dictate how we behave. So someone gets angry, they get angry and they just go to the extreme opposite of anger, and it becomes uncontrollable. Intelligence will say, actually, it's okay to be angry, but see if you can see how you can actually regulate your anger. So emotion regulation is realizing that we have the ability, if we choose, to regulate how I'm feeling. Noticing that anger is arising and saying to myself, actually, it's okay. I'm feeling a bit of anger now. Or I'm feeling a bit of nervousness now. That's okay that I'm feeling nervousness. And getting in touch with it. Breathing it in. And then noticing that as you breathe in that emotion or the fear, don't forget emotion, that word emotion is just a word. Actually, I like to describe emotions as your felt sense. Whatever it is that you're sensing and feeling is what your emotions are. Just getting in touch with that and feeling what you're feeling, not labeling it as such, just feeling it and noticing it. And then noticing that when you do that, it sort of begins to dissipate. Now, there's something called emotional literacy, which is actually when you feel something, label it. What are you feeling? Actually call it out. You know? So if I'm feeling nervousness, being able to say, actually, my heart's feeling a bit dodgy at the moment. And actually, maybe my heart's fluttering. But using a word to label how you're feeling takes the edge off it. Emotional literacy. It's almost like reading a book, right? Literate. You can pick up a book and read. So you're literate. You can read a book. Well, actually, we can, through practice, we can actually begin to read or become literate about our emotions too. So emotional intelligence is all about that. It's about recognizing that there's intelligence not just in thinking, and thinking is a great thing, but there's also intelligence too in how we emote and becoming literate about how we emote and practicing becoming literate about how we emote. Bringing awareness into practicing about how we emote. It's almost like, when you're constantly, you take a sharp knife, and you're carving, you're carving something, well, that's how I describe emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence for me is part of my journey towards becoming the best human being that I can become by managing how I show up, managing how I feel, noticing how I feel. It's a practice. It's an ongoing practice, but learning to leverage that to be the best human being I can be at any moment in time.
I love how you described emotions as one, energy in motion, but also two, as almost like a lesson. Like it's a teacher. It's got something to show you. And
Love that.
I wonder, even in the language to manage emotion, which is something that we say, to regulate emotion, there's an inherent adversity towards the emotion actually baked into the language that we use. And there's something that I've observed about bringing awareness to emotion is that awareness has a loving nature to it.
Yeah.
And emotions need love
Yeah.
the way we need oxygen.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have been taught to manage our emotions,
Yes.
to calm your emotions,
Yes.
to box your emotions away,
Yeah.
or another form of suppression.
Yeah.
And what you're actually describing is a curiosity towards, a turning towards the emotion with a humility of, what are you here to teach me?
Yeah.
I want to understand you.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the first prerequisite. You mentioned as well the labeling of an emotion as a really powerful tool. Are there any other tools that you have found particularly powerful for understanding your emotional landscape, learning from your emotions, and befriending them?
Yeah. I love the way you describe that. There's a lesson that emotions are teaching us. It's bring what I've one of the things that I've I think the biggest learning that I've learned about that emotions teach me is bringing a sense of compassion to emotions, to how I'm feeling. You know, we live in a world where we are just bombarded with so much, whether that's on the television, through our mobile phones, just dealing with so much challenge, whether that's at work, at home, just challenges after challenge, and that has an emotional impact on how we show up and how we feel, and bringing a sense, allowing that to happen, but almost wrapping your arms around your emotion as though giving your emotion a big warm hug with compassion. And this is one of the things I do, and I've learned this all the time. No matter how it is that I'm feeling, Kia, no matter what it is, and particularly when it's you see, the true test is when something is not going your way. When you have every reason to scream, when you've got every reason to run away from something, when you've got every reason to say to the world, hey, why is this happening to me? Why is this constantly happening to me? At those periods, if we can wrap our arms around whatever that is, with a warm embrace, and this is really coming from the heart of Buddhist literature, wrapping your arms around your emotion with a warm, compassionate embrace, and actually noticing what that feels like when you do it, what you find is that it's almost as if the power of the emotion just disintegrates, it just drops. And when that typically happens is when you're dealing with uncertainty. You know, we like to know what's going to happen before it happens. It's a human condition. Like we want to know, tell me right now what's going to happen. And we don't know what's going to happen. And it can be hard, you know, not having a job, trying to set up a business and it's just not working. And you've got the bills to pay, right? You got to put food on the table. You got letters coming through letterbox reminding you that you've got to pay this car fine that you've got that's been hanging around for months, right? And it can be hard. Life can be hard. Life can be painful. And the emotionality involved in that and all the uncertainty that goes with that That right there is the typical lived experience of many people in Australia, many people in the world, and the emotion that arises with that uncertainty. How do you deal with it? How do we deal with that? My learning is when those things arise, and they will happen. In fact, they happen on a moment to moment basis. Being able to wrap your arms around that, as though, like, when a little child is screaming their head off, and you pick up the little child and you rock it, and you rock it. And what happens as you rock it, as you keep on rocking it, you find that the crying just begins to wane a little bit. And then perhaps you bring it closer to your body and you give it a hug. That right there is how I think is a best way I can describe how you manage your emotions. And I do agree with what you're saying. The word manage can almost feel kind of corporate-y. You manage your emotions. Well, you can't really manage your emotions because if anything else, they manage you, right? They manage you. So it's really about, it's not managing, it's embracing it. Maybe that's the better word. Embracing it. Emotion regulation is a kind of a real, highbrow way of speaking about it. But actually, we embrace our emotions, just like we embrace something that we love. Yeah. We embrace our emotions, particularly those challenging ones. We embrace them. Give ourselves a break. Yeah. Do the opposite. So there's something that is quite countercultural about embracing your emotions when and let me be really clear here. There are times when I've sat in the corner and had one hell of a good cry. Have the cry. Have that good cry. I've had it. I've had a number of good cries. Tears coming down my eyes and, screaming out to the world saying, why is this happening? That's, you got to release. There's nothing wrong with that. And after you've done that, or whilst you're doing that at the same time, putting your hand on your back and going, do you know what, Jude? You know what, Kian? It's all good. And then noticing how you feel after you've done that. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's beautiful and inspiring to hear, in particular, a man describe that with such vulnerability and love and passion, because there's a shift happening in men across the Western world where we are being asked to reclaim some of those more feminine qualities.
Yes.
And there's a really powerful role. There's a lot of wonderful women in my life who have shown me how to do that. And I really think that is a critical step in reducing the amount of male mental health challenges leading to suicide in this country.
Yeah.
And in many other countries in the West.
Yeah.
And because we are taught that we are machines.
Yeah.
And that our self-worth as a machine is based on our output.
Yeah.
And so our love for ourselves is cut off and it's made conditional based on what we do in the world. And we're fed these continuous streams. And it's not just that we've been fed that. To be a human is to carry the DNA of your ancestors. It's to carry the emotional challenges of your ancestors. And ancestrally, for a lot of people, even going back to when we were animals, as you described, life is hard. It is an incredible achievement just to feel safe in this moment, for your nervous system to feel safe now. In my experience, that can only be achieved through radical compassion. Because it's the radical compassion, it's the love that the nervous system needs, just like a child. When it doesn't get that compassion and sense of safety and calmness when it's young, will grow up to have challenges. in how it's regulated and how it manages its emotions. And so you're not just doing this for you now, you're doing it for the other.
Absolutely.
And the other includes everyone who went before you,
Yeah.
living and non-living.
Yeah.
Because at whatever point, everything that has happened in the co-arising, interdependent relationships of this whole cosmos resulted in you here now with this emotion. And your sacred job is to be with it fully and completely with love. And the transformative effect that will have is enormous.
Enormous. There's something, as you know, my background is within OD. I do organizational development, which is really all about building capability in organizations. And talking about, I just like the way you described the otherness, the otherness aspect of emotions. There's something called, and there's something called emotion contagion. How I deal with my emotions as a leader in an organization and bring that into an organization. And if I don't manage that, if I don't embrace that, if I adopt an approach to how I'm feeling by either pushing it under the carpet or allowing an emotional blow up, there is an energetic impact that has on other people. So other people can walk into a workplace environment and you know this, you walk into a room and you can sense, can't you, that something isn't quite right. And you don't know what it is. But then you unconsciously find yourself tapping into that which doesn't feel quite right and you don't know what it is. This is why we go in OD, we say you can walk into an organization and you can go like that and you can taste the atmosphere. Emotions are real. They may not be visible, but they're energetic. There is an otherness. There is an other responsibility that we have, not just in organizations, but just generally in life, to really manage how I feel, because I'm aware that it has an impact on other people. I have to manage myself because it has an energetic impact. And so I really just like the way that you phrase that, because it's not an individual experience that I have. That it's just that there are aspects that pertain to just me, but actually, how I deal with that, how I embrace that, how I bring compassion to that or not, has an impact on others, whether at work, at home, or at play. And so being able to always take a step back as best I can to notice what's happening with me. And so this is a constant mindful practice. It's a constant meditative practice for me to bring, myself back to the soles of my feet, back to my body, back to my breathing. Enables me to have greater awareness of what's happening at each moment, so I can show up for myself as I am right now to the best of my ability, knowing that when I do that, I'm showing up the best for others as well.
Yeah, for anyone who is really confused about what meditation means, meditation, simply put, staying in touch with your being in the midst of existence, in the midst of experience. And it's not about being on the mat. It's not about doing 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of meditation. It's about becoming meditative, a meditative approach to the environment. And that unlocks so many things. And you don't have to be on a mat. The world is actually your meditation studio.
Mm-hmm.
And everything can be approached meditatively. In fact, it's probably better to get up off the mat and go out into the world and pay attention, non-judgmental attention to the present as a practice, because that's where it really comes into play. And one of the things that I have noticed is that when you do that, you give space for others to also do that.
Yeah.
And to be more fully themselves. And I know that you are fascinated by leadership and this whole area of leadership. And a lot of the listeners to this podcast, there will be some people who work in corporate. There'll be a lot who don't.
Yeah.
And who are interested more in the spiritual, in the mystical, in the self-development. But leadership exists everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not just a corporate piece. I would love to hear some of your reflections, experiences, thoughts on this whole space of leadership and each person as a leader in whatever context
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a really good way of phrasing leadership as almost like a meditative practice, but it's one that is not done on the mat. The world is your mat. For me, leadership is just that. Leadership is. I was actually talking. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was actually given a presentation on a workshop on leadership, and someone asked a question. They went, "So when you talk about leadership, is it all about corporate stuff? Do I have to be like do I have to be leading people, Jude?" And I said no. I said leadership is actually it's less about leading people, because often when we think about leadership, we think about managing people. It's not about leading. It's not. It does, whilst it incorporates that. The fundamental place for leadership, for me, my own leadership journey started when I realized, hey, I can't control what's going on here. That was for me when it started. The leadership is really all about recognizing that something is not right with me, not with others, with me. What am I going to do about that? So leadership looked at from that perspective, and Goldman talks about this, it's about how Jude leads Jude. How do I sort myself out? What do I do to better manage how I feel right now? So leadership is about self-management. How do I deal with me? How do I deal with my feelings? Are my feelings taking me overboard at the moment? In organizations, it's about that's the place to start before you can lead others. I mean, Goldman is really clear about this when he talks about, uh, leadership first of all starts with yourself. How do you lead your own ship is the way I like to describe it. Because if your ship has sailed and you're still sat here, well, you need to go and you need to go and get that ship and bring it back, you know. So leading myself, and I guess my journey, when I think about my own journey, and it's a continuing journey, it's really a journey of how I'm leading myself. The more I can lead myself, then automatically I can lead others. And that's the way I like to describe it. If one intentionally sets out to lead other people without first of all starting with themselves, it's just not going to work. And I guess that's the part, certainly in organizational language, that I feel we need to sort of pull back about how I transform as a human being first, and how the more I become more self-compassionate, the more I become more curious about what's going on within me, the more I learn to love myself, the more as a man, I recognize that, hey, I'm not just masculine, I'm feminine. I've got a feminine side. The more I do more of that, the more I lead myself. And then the more, by implication, I begin to lead others. And for me, the practice side of that, And this is quite simple. And I do this. And it's something that I've learned from the days when I was in the monastery until now. It's a meditation. I actually don't like to use the word meditation because I know it can be off-putting for some people. I prefer the word practice. But every step that we walk, every single step, the muscles move. There's a movement of the bones. You can feel the muscles move at the back of your legs. And actually every step moves up towards the body. Every single step. If I bring awareness to every movement that I make, awareness means I don't necessarily think about it, but I'm aware of it. It brings to me and it brings to anyone that practices it, a certain sense of, now this is not the word, but it's almost as if you're in quote unquote in control of every movement. Every step that I take, I bring an awareness to each movement. That for me is leadership. It's me leading me moment to moment. And it enables me to show up at my best. And even now as I'm doing that, I'm bringing awareness to the fact that I'm doing that. It's enabling me to pay attention to you even more. And that's me leading me. And even as I'm saying that round, there's a kind of a relaxing that I'm feeling, even when I say that. That's me leading me. And we want people to do the same. Not because there's a spiritual prize at the end, but there's a joy of there's a joy of knowing that you are in touch with yourself, which you can't really quantify, but in doing so, you are better able to work with others. Too theoretical?
No, I don't think it's too theoretical. I think it is extremely relieving, actually, for anyone who is terrified by the word leadership, or is leading a family, or is even just any person, is because the structures that we have put in place around leadership, like the visible structures, are in many cases just an illusion.
Yeah.
It's just an illusion. Call someone a leader, call someone a manager, doesn't make them so. What you're really articulating is that if you bring full intention and humility and dedication to the radical act of being yourself and loving yourself, you automatically move into a space where others can do the same.
Yeah.
And that is the golden place of leaders creating more leaders, or raising a child that is going to be their own person in the world and be highly functioning and all the things that we want from our children, to be a friend for another friend, to be a partner, to be a lover, to be all of those things, all of the different roles that we play. It's actually through this radical focus on being your best self in every moment. Everything else flows from there.
Yeah.
There's a passage in the Tao Te Ching which I have become just fascinated with, and it articulates this quite beautifully. So it's passage 16. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you, and when death comes, you are ready.
I like that. you can deal with whatever life brings you. I like that. There's what that brings to my mind is so in leadership there's an aspect that is called transformational leadership, which is part of my so I'm doing a PhD, as you know, and my research actually is within the area of transformational leadership. And as part of that research, I interviewed eight senior leaders in organizations here in Australia. Um, and I've done the analysis on those interviews. And there's one particular thing, the number of key themes that have come out of that. But one particular area that came out in terms of the how of being a leader, the how of leadership. I mean, we sort of mentioned it before, but just when you read that, it's the ability to manage or to handle pain. Being a leader is not easy. It's hard work. Whether you're managing yourself or managing others, it's not easy. In fact, I remember one of the leaders that I interviewed, they mentioned that when that pain arises, particularly in the workplace, they go into the toilet. She said to me, I go into the toilet, Jude. I sit down on the toilet. I take some deep breaths. She says, for about 3 to 5 minutes, I take some deep breaths. And after I've taken those deep breaths, I then go out and I feel okay. I feel better to keep on. Leadership comes with imposter syndrome, not feeling that you're good enough. They just arise. These things arise in a moment. Yeah. Feeling that you haven't got the answer to questions. The emotional turmoil, all of that going on. And all of this stuff is happening in the moment. But being able to deal with that pain of leading at that point, is where the transformation happens. So it's important when we have these conversations to be able to go, leadership ain't easy. And I know that there's this nurture-nature divide, isn't there? There's, some people are naturally born leaders and some people are nurtured into becoming leaders. Either or, it involves hard work. I guess that's what comes to mind when you read that passage, that there is pain here. But it's been okay. It's been okay. Being able to sit with that pain, being okay with it, knowing that like the weather that changes, things come and things go, like the waves of the ocean which arise and fall. The pain comes and goes, and you're here. That's the transformation. That's the ongoing journey of leadership, leading oneself and leading others. That just came to mind when you read that poem.
Inherent in all of this conversation about focusing on the present moment and seeing the mind as an aspect of yourself which you can dip into and dip out to, and is you can roll it out when you need to and roll it back when you don't, and use it as a beautiful tool as it was meant to be used, rather than it being the master, it being a wonderful part of yourself and a tool. The same with emotions, like they're the juice of life, like engaging with them beautifully, but always recognizing, staying in touch with your being in the midst of experience. Now, the number one argument against that is, but what about the future? Because what my mind is doing, if you observe it long enough, it's automatically running scenarios.
Yeah.
It's doing a lot of social thinking about relationships and implications of this and that. It's thinking about what needs to be done in the rest of the day, the week, the months, the years. It's telling you it's warding off future threats. Now, if I'm to give up that as my modus operandi, as my way of being, then I have to trust in the present moment and in the future that it's not bad and it's going to come and get me. And in order for that to happen, you have to put your faith in your ability to handle the future, or that there's some other force that's orchestrating things, and that force has your best interest at heart. And so I'd be interested in your musings, your understandings around, if you're going to take this type of approach to life, how do you fall into that trust in the unfolding of the present moment and what it's to bring you?
Yeah. And there's a pause there before I responded, because I guess it's about recognizing that, we talk about the past, we talk about the present, we talk about the future. And actually all there is the present. All there is right now. The past has gone. The past is a figment of our imagination, as is the future is just an idea of what could potentially happen, the expectation of what is coming, but it's nothing more than an expectation. And so it's about being able to trust in what's here and doing the best that you can with what's here. It's about learning to practice not relying entirely on what I'm thinking. It's about learning to practice with not relying entirely on what I am emoting about, which might sound quite simplistic, but is that there's a real kernel of truth there. We live in a society where, we plan ahead. There's nothing wrong with planning ahead, but it's also recognizing that even when we plan ahead, that we're doing that from here. We're doing that from now, from where we are. I think it's Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about the present moment and being here. And I think I like Eckhart Tolle so much. I've read all his books, and his approach to the philosophy behind his thinking. I feel I share. I've always had I've always had a connection with. I've always felt a real connection to that. But I guess the nub of our conversation since we've been speaking has been about recognizing the self as that which is the eternal. It's just that constant. It's that constant that is here and now. And so I think for me, it's having that steadiness, the awareness that the past, what the mind does with the past is more often bring on what I didn't do quite right. What can I change? There are lessons to learn. Of course, there are lessons to learn. There's something good about being reflective, but not to allow that to overly judge me. And then when I project forward to the future, not to catastrophize about the future, but to realize that what happens in the future really determines in terms of how I show up now. It's how I show up now that determines my quote unquote future. The lessons in the past determine how I show up in the present. What have I learned about the past? About how I show up in the past? How does that actually relate to how I show up now? And how do I bring present moment awareness to that? I've always, when we, in organizational strategy, when we develop strategies in the organization, one of the things that I tend to speak to leaders about is, okay, we're developing a strategy for the future now. We're building a 3-year plan. We're building a 5-year plan for our organization. This is important. What flexibility do I bring into that plan? How much flexibility do I bring? And that flexibility, is it coming from a place? Is it coming from a space of taking a pause, stopping for a second, thinking about all the things that I've written down, and actually taking a pause, taking a step back and looking at that and going, where is the space that I'm bringing into this? How am I being mindful about the plan that I'm making in the future, about my 2-year or 3-year or 4-year or 5-year strategy? And so I guess the point that it's a very simple point that I'm trying to make here, which is really learning to be comfortable with where I am now, knowing that this is all I have. Cognition is constantly like that. We're constantly thinking about the past and the future. And sometimes we forget what really matters, which is what I have now. Does that make sense? And I guess that's the part. Is that juice that we miss? It's what we're missing here right now that actually determines that going forward, or that in the past. I like to see if I can sit here. I've worked in many corporate jobs. I love working in the corporate space. One of the challenges that I've had with the corporate space is that sometimes we overplan. We want to get everything. We want to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's, and to do that now. And actually, if all the I's and all the T's aren't dotted and crossed, if all the unknowns become knowns, I mean, if all the unknowns, right, if all the unknowns in the future cannot be known now, then there's something wrong. That strategy is not going to work. So keep on working at it to make sure that there are no unknowns, that we eradicate all the uncertainties. From a mindful perspective, and from the perspective that we're having this conversation, what we want to do is to allow space for the unknowns, allow space for the uncertainties. When COVID hit, what challenged companies, what challenged organizations was all of a sudden, they had no more control. When COVID hit, working from home was problematic because managers didn't trust people to work from home because we haven't got control over you. How do we know that you're going to do the work? But what happened? What happened was that when COVID hit, managers they were forced to let people work from home. They were forced, whereby they had no more control. We now had to trust people to do the work. And what became evident was that companies actually made a lot more profit when people were left, as it were, when trust arose and managers had to trust people. It was a surprise. Companies became a lot more economically viable because actually when you trust people to deal with uncertainty, they recognize more than they ever did, and managers come to recognize more than they ever did. And actually, when you let that bird fly, it will realize that it's got wings.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of forced self-growth from a leader leading to better conditions for everyone to thrive. Because that is a jump in consciousness, which is if I create the space for others to be at their best, they will be at their best.
Yeah.
And people are inherently motivated to do good work and to seek meaning in the world and to achieve. And it's actually my job to create the conditions for that to emerge. And my lack of trust and my over management of them comes from my own trauma.
Yeah.
And it's not in their best interest. And so, again, a great example of how the leader who works on themselves first and foremost automatically goes on to the other what's beneficial for them and automatically creates an environment that is high performing. And the best preparation that you can have for the future is to be here, present, fully awake and alive, and have access to your intelligence in this moment. That is the best. And I've been involved in many organizations over the last 10 years, and they've talked about strategies and this and that. For the vast majority of people in those organizations, that strategy is a complete illusion. Let's be real. They don't refer to it day to day. They don't talk about it. They don't know it. They couldn't articulate it. It's not actually informing how they're being on a daily basis. And it doesn't mean that directionally it doesn't have to be set. It's just not. It's not being done well or in reality. I think people are more aware of that now. But I would love to. I want to change tack slightly and come to a bigger question that I am really wrestling with at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is, if I am the awareness in which all of is happening, and that awareness has got depths, and that awareness is also you, because your experience is the same as my experience, and every other person on this planet, then what does that say about what God is? And is that awareness that's inside me the same as the one that's inside you? And is it at the highest level one unified field or 0 point? Are we different aspects of God or that super soul or that ultimate awareness looking out through different viewports? And you're in that spacesuit and I'm in this spacesuit. And what your philosophical perspective is on that, but also your experiential perspective on it and what you've learned about that over your lifetime. That would be so interesting to me.
It's a very big theological question, isn't it? It's a big.
I just have the man in the chair for the answer as well. That's why I'm asking it.
It's a big theological question. I think. So, some people call it God. Some people call it awareness. Some people don't call it anything at all. Atheists may not believe in the concept of a God. They don't have to, but they exist within the field of awareness. So I guess, listen, I think for me, my own personal journey has been one of day-to-day struggle and understanding of what that is. You and I can sit here, for example, and we share a common passion for these things that we're speaking about. There's a commonality there. There's a clear commonality there. But every person's experience is different. Everyone's experience of awareness is different at different levels of awareness. Even in emotional intelligence, we talk of different levels of awareness. I'm thinking of a person called Keegan, an academic called Keegan. And Keegan talks about different levels of awareness. The highest being, I believe, is called the socialized mind, where actually a person is able to not just see society and all of the conditions in society, but actually can rise above the conditions of society and also be able to see those conditions and the conditions that drive those conditions, but then they can separate themselves out of that to be able to see all of the influences. Before you can get to that level of awareness, it takes a lot of struggle and strive, a lot of spending time doing what that person does in order to be able to see that, to be able to feel that. And I'm brought to mind This saying that whilst people say that they are emotionally aware, that they're self-aware, that actually the people that say that they're self-aware are by no means self-aware at all. I think there's some research that says 85% of the world's population say that they're self-aware, but actually only about 25 really are self-aware. So I guess my own experiential take on that is that word, isn't it? Being a human being. We are all human beings. And I guess that being part, what does that mean for me to be? What does it mean to be? What does it mean to be? Like for me, to be means to be here, to be aware that I'm breathing. And just taking that example, how aware are you that you are breathing right now? That may sound like the most stupid question to ask. It really might. It really is. But actually, in that stupidity, something really important, I guess, is a response to this question. Because I think every day, every human being breathes in about 23,000 times a day in 24 hours. What is it? I think it's about, and I did do some research on that. I think it's about 960 breaths that we take every hour, or something like that. At the end of 24 hours, we've breathed in about 23,000 times. How aware are we? I mean, during the day, do I go breath one, breath number two? No, we don't. But if someone says to you, Jude, you're not going to be able to breathe for the next 5 minutes, you go into panic mode, right? Because you realize it's very important to breathe. I know that if I don't breathe for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to pass out. I'll die. So being aware that you breathe is fundamentally important, but we don't always do that. Being aware that I breathe doesn't mean that I have to count how many breaths that I take. It just means that I am bringing awareness to the fact that actually every breath I take keeps me alive. But it's also recognizing when I do that I also become aware that actually I am not the one breathing. I am being breathed. I'm not the one breathing. I am being breathed. And I often say, if you think that you're the one breathing, then go on, try and stop breathing then. And you recognize that actually, the more you try not to breathe, the more breathing happens. So my own personal journey has been one of, like I've talked about, my own journey has been one of me actually finding myself through suffering. And my suffering started at a young age. And when I say suffering, I'm really referring to the fact that all human beings suffer. Some of us we avoid it. In my case, it was almost as if I was thrown into having to find what that was. That was my own journey. And that's been my own journey of awareness. It's been my own journey of growing. And it's still a continuous journey. And so my own awareness has grown and is growing from that perspective. I am by no means anywhere higher than anyone else. I am continuing to struggle with everyone else. There are days when I wake up in the morning, I don't want to even think about practicing anything. There's some days I go, okay, I want to feel my feet and I can't be bothered to do it. But hey, that's a journey. And so I guess the answer, finding a way of answering your question, I guess what I'm saying is, every human person, whether they are doing something or not, they will be aware of that. There's almost a sense of something going on behind the scenes, behind closed doors. At some point, when you sit down, and sometimes you find yourself staring into space, which we all do, just staring into space. You get that subtle prick somewhere deep down there in your gut. That question that you asked at the start of this conversation: who am I? What is all of this about? When those questions are being asked, in those questions, every human being, no matter what faith or non-faith that they are, every human being in that question, there is something there that if they become a little bit curious about, they will discover, they will find, that's what it is. And it's so subtle that it can be missed. Many people go through life and they miss that very simple question. And I think we are fortunate that we've had the opportunity to be sat here today talking about that, which many of us miss all the time, just like we miss breathing. We go through the whole day and we don't realize that we breathe. We completely miss that which is so fundamental. That's why I go back to the breath. And ironically, in Buddhist literature, in mindfulness, the core strand that all of those things have together is the breath, returning back to what really matters, what's keeping us here. What is that? And sometimes the answer to the question is no answer. It's actually just being with it, learning to sit with it, learning to sit with and getting comfortable with not knowing what the answer to that question is. And actually that right there is the answer, not trying to find the answer, but just to be with it. It's countercultural. And this is why sometimes when we have these conversations, it doesn't make sense, but actually in not making sense, therein lies the sense. Does that make sense?
I feel like this is why often the highest teaching offered by any of the great saints, I'm thinking about people like Sri Ramana Maharshi, was to say, come and sit with me in silence, pure silence. And then if I have to speak to point to something where you're at, then I will. But if I don't, then we'll just sit here in silence, in pure presence. And in sitting there in silence and just paying attention to what is, you start to realize that you are that which is paying attention. That's continuous, that's always there. That's in the world, but not of the world. It's not implicated by any of the things that happen to Jude. And for me, there's no limitation on that force. And I liked what you brought in about different levels of awareness, because the way I see that from my own experiences is different levels of access to awareness. It's almost like when we're really stuck in a victim-based emotion of hurt and we're running these narratives in our head, our awareness is very, very narrow. But as we sit back and train that, dropping that, coming back, our awareness starts to broaden and broaden and broaden. And it has been my experience at a few moments, not continuously, that never stops, actually. There's no limit to that. And that awareness is in unity with everything else. And it's actually just our ignorance of our looking through this tiny little thing that holds us back from recognizing that. And the more you drop into that space, the more you realize that you actually are that. And I think that is pure freedom, because you can then be as the witness. So like knowing that, you then play even better in all of this. And you play the role with abandon and freedom and with the lack of seriousness and fun and like it all doesn't matter so much. It all just really doesn't matter so much. And you become like a child.
Yes.
And rediscover that innocence.
Yes.
And it's if there's a practice for me right now, it's just remembering that every single morning, the first thing I wake up. Because the first time in the morning when you're hit, I feel like you're hit by an absolute railroad of all your conditioning immediately. For me, when I wake up, boom, in comes the mind, in comes all the things I have to do, in comes all these conditions that I must meet in that day in order to be enough, to have self-worth, for it to be a good day, a successful day. And the dropping back away from that illusion and the recognition that there is nothing that you need to do, because you are the awareness that is the source of this entire universe. And it's getting that from a conceptual level down into the depths of your being and your nervous system. And for me, that's what someone who has realized actually is someone who, at a very, very nervous system level, at a sensory, emotional, thought level, just embodies that truth. And that for me is God.
Yeah. The nervous system, very important. The nervous system. I think it's our conditioning happens at that level, the nervous system, and actually most of life is about deconditioning what we've been conditioned by at a nervous system level. What is it? I think it's what's that famous quote by Albert Kavinsky? God may forgive you your sins, but your nervous system will not.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. God will forgive you your sins, but your nervous system will not. That's the battleground.
It's the battleground.
The nervous system, the conditioning of the nervous system.
Which is why the compassionate awareness towards whatever is arising is the key that unlocks those buried memories coming up into awareness, being loved and known and integrated.
We cannot, and you've mentioned this word a number of times, and I think it's really important because we cannot downplay compassion. Compassion is like it's like the ice water that you pour on a raging fire. Compassion, that which is embraced is in fact the nervous system. That which you wrap your arms around is in fact the nervous system, because the nervous system, you've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight responses. The nervous system doing things to protect you. It's actually doing things. It thinks it's doing things to protect you, but in actual fact, in protecting you, it's actually keeping you away. And so there's a pattern that we need to intentionally reverse, almost putting ourselves to the fire of what the nervous system is protecting us from. And in doing that, beginning to unwire what we've been wired, the way that we've been wired to behave. And, you mentioned about you mentioned about the space of awareness. The quote by Viktor Frankl comes to mind. And it goes like, in between stimulus and response, there is a space. In between stimulus and response, there is a space. What that simply means is that those things that happen where we just immediately react, before that reaction happens, there's an opportunity there. There's a little space where you can go, actually, almost like a prick of conscience that is there going, before you do that, there's an opportunity. It's a tiny little space there where you can go, I'm going to hold myself back. I'm going to hold myself. That's the nervous system going. The nervous system is going, do that thing. That's the way you always do it, Jude. But there's a little space where there's something going, hold yourself back. If we can just take a breath at that time, whatever it is, it might be an emotional outburst, it might be anger, rising anger, it might be fear of doing something, it might be the imposter syndrome rearing its head just as you're about to give a presentation, or just as you're about to talk. It might be self-doubt, whatever that thing is. Just before that thing occurs, there is a little space. If we can take a breath, just take a breath at that period. Viktor Frankl says the space just gets ever so wider. And so the practice of taking a breath during those moments of reactivity, during those moments of when the nervous system is about to set in and do its thing, and it does it so well, if we can just take a breath there, the space just gradually gets bigger and bigger. And that's my finger that's going bigger. That right there is a space of awareness, the different levels of awareness that people have. And even that space right there is immense from an awareness perspective. It's just immense. The door of awareness is just immense. I often describe it just as you think that you've reached a level of awareness. There's a door at the end. You open that door and it's like, oh, there's more here. And there's so much more here. And there's so much more. There's always learning to be had. It's that space of awareness that we have to learn to drop into by overcoming the nervous system through those little actions of taking a breath, feeling the body. In meditative practice, there's something called the open awareness meditation, open awareness practice, which is a practice of when you just take everything around you and within you, just paying attention to it. You know, the light coming in from here, the feeling of my glasses against the bridge of my nose. You've got hair, so that strand of hair sort of touching your forehead. All of those, taking all of that in, not thinking about it, just being aware of it. You notice that actually there's a space that begins to open. It's a form of it's a practice form. And there's research behind this too, as well, in Buddhist literature that shows that the more that we learn to pay attention to those things that we don't necessarily pay attention to, the nervous system, the tremors of the nervous system begin to just ever so gently begin to dissipate. We get more control is not the word. We get more control of patterns of behavior that we often tend to be usurped by. We get more capability to quote unquote manage that just by taking a step back. I like to use the word taking a step back. This space, Viktor Frankl's space between response and stimuli, just begins to open, you know.
Yeah. If I'm someone now who's like, yes, Jude, I'm sold. I want to live my life from that space. Is there a short meditation or a little practice that you could perhaps guide me in that I could clip and share for that person?
Of course. And we can do that right now, you know. And as you mentioned that to me, I felt my eyes close. And as you close your eyes or not, you can leave your eyes open or not, whatever works best for you. As you close your eyes, just bring attention, for example, to how you're sitting. And I like to use the phrase how your body is located currently. What angle, for example, are the soles of your feet? What angle is it placed on the floor? How are your thighs placed on the chair that you're sitting on? Notice your back, how it's arched or not. So that's bringing attention to the whole of your body as best as you can. So there's no perfectionism here. And so the word that we use is noticing. Just noticing how your body is placed at the moment. And as you notice how your body is placed and paying attention to that, an awareness arises now of how you're breathing. The air going through your nostrils, hitting your stomach, and coming out. So you begin to notice now this cyclical pattern of your breathing in and out. And in again and out. And so now you're paying attention to your breathing. You're paying attention to your body. And you may notice now with each breath that you take, you may notice some sensations around your body. These sensations could be warm. They could be cold sensations. Perhaps you're not noticing anything at all. Noticing that too. And so where we are right now in this short practice is you are sitting in a space of awareness. It's very subtle, very unassuming. Sitting here. And as you sit here, you may notice now that your mind begins to wander. Or you may notice thoughts coming in your mind and out. The key is not to fight them. The key is to sit, breathing, feeling your body, and from there, observing your thoughts, watching them. Like clouds in the sky, they come and they go. Not fighting your thoughts, welcoming them, wrapping your arms around your thoughts with a warm embrace. So just sit here now in this space that we've created, this space of awareness. And if you can hear the birds chirping in the distance, a car drive past, somebody talking in the distance, welcome all of that too as part of this short practice. And if the mind wanders away, don't be harsh. This is what the mind does. Bring it back to your breathing. So this is sitting within a space of awareness. And so coming towards the end now of this short practice, returning now back to your breathing, noticing your breathing, feeling your body as best as you can, all parts of your body, physical, mental and emotional. And now taking one breath in, breathing all the way down to your big toe if you can. And when you're ready, open up your eyes and feeling relaxed. And thank you.
Thank you. The invitation there is as you come out of that and you go, oh, I don't want to leave this place. Don't leave that place. Notice that that place is always there.
This is correct, yes.
And anything that tells you that it's time to leave that place, to get out, to abandon that, to let it go, that's not truly who you are. And so see it for what it is. It's like a thief in a house. And eventually it'll become a thief in an empty house. So thank you so much for that guidance. I have a closing question on this podcast.
Yeah.
As it is called Humankinder, which is about the evolution of humankind and all the ways in which we are growing and evolving right now. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is possible for this human experience and what is possible for humankind.
I think what you just said there at the end of the practice is exactly the answer to that question. If you've just come out of this short meditation feeling relaxed, feeling a sense of purposiveness, feeling that you touched something that you hadn't touched before, just the way you said that, it doesn't have to end there. You can take that with you as you stand up at the end of this podcast. You can take that with you and keep on feeling that as you go about doing your doing. That's the biggest, that right there is what meditation is all about. It's not about sitting on the mat. We can be kinder to ourselves as human beings when we learn to take that state, which we just experienced, take that with you to the supermarket. Take it with you to the workplace. Take it with you as you drive, as you get on a train, as you work on your computer. Take that state with you. You can take it with you. It doesn't have to end when you get off the mat. It's where it's always there, always available. And when we learn to operate from that space, that's what it means for me to be human kinder. Be more kinder to ourselves. Be more kinder to me as a human being through dropping into that space of awareness that has always been there, but maybe we've been missing it.
Yeah, let that be a prayer for humanity, that every being on this planet can rediscover that birthright.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to share that we think you haven't covered? Any final thoughts?
I think you've been amazing. I think it's been a great time sitting here, just really just sharing whatever has arisen, allowing that to come out. It's been a great time. I guess if there's one final thing from me, it'll be for anyone who is going through any kind of pain, any kind of personal challenge, any kind of suffering, something that they're dealing with at the moment that is just causing so much agony. And as counter as this may sound, I want them to know that it's okay. Do you know? That it's okay. Behind that pain, whatever it is they're going through, I want them to know deep inside that it's okay. To put their hand on their heart and for them to say to themselves, this too will pass. Do you know? That right there is a heart of what it means to be mindful. It's a heart of what it means to be aware. Just knowing, even though you don't know, but just knowing that this too will pass.
Beautiful. People are curious about your work, about connecting with you, about what you're doing. Where can they best find you?
Best find me on info@judemartin.com. So that's Jude with a hyphen. So jude-martin.com. Jude-Martin.com is my website. It's currently changing, going through a period of metamorphosis. So that's changing itself. But info@judemartin.com is info@jude-martin.com is my email address. So by all means, drop me a note there. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. And your energy and radiance and curiosity has been beautiful to be in. And
can I add, so has yours.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is the prize of this work as we both work towards is to live from this place more. And man, what a prize that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Q. Pleasure.